Hi everyone, and welcome to the fourth lesson in our Poetry GCSE revision series. If you're sitting the GCSEs this year or next year or even the year after that, there should be some good content in here for you, whether you're looking to improve your power and conflict or your love and relationships poetry, the sort of seen poems, the anthology, or if you're looking to improve your unseen poetry. What we're doing each week is we're basically taking a poem, treating it as an unseen poem. But obviously, if it's one of the poems that is in your anthology, and I've tried to mostly use poems from power and conflict or love and relationships, then of course that's going to help you revise that poem as well. So in the last few weeks, what we've been doing is going through Bayonet Charge and looking at structure, which is from power and conflict. Mother Any Distance, that's from love and relationships. My Last Duchess, that's from power and conflict. This week, I had planned to go through a poem called Nettles with you, but actually based on the students who are live in this session, I'm going to do Manhunt instead, which is a poem which I don't believe they have done. And whichever poem we end up doing, I can always give the same sort of things. And we're going to be thinking particularly about themes and motifs. So as anyone who I've ever done any poetry lessons with knows, I use this thing called cart wars. So context at the beginning, this is really only for anthology. If you're doing unseen poetry essays, you don't need to know about the context of your poems. You need to know what the meanings behind the poem are, having read it, deeper meanings, why the poem was written. You need to think about any repeated ideas. That's what we'll look at today, particularly themes and motifs. You need to think about the tone that is created by the poetic voice. Is it a happy voice? Is it a sad voice? Is it, thoughtful and deep, or is it sort of just uplifting, sad, scared, human emotions, right? You need to be able to analyze the words in the poems. We've looked at that in the past a little bit. We'll do a bit more in the future as well. You need to be able to look at the language devices in the poems. So similes, metaphors, juxtaposition, alliteration. The other big thing that I would say with poetry, because it is a spoken word sort of art form, is anything to do with the way that the poem sounds is usually a really good thing to focus on. And that is called phonology, the phonology of things. So like, for example, sibilance has a hissing phonology, the S sound or the F sound creates a hissing phonology, a hissing sound. You need to obviously look at rhythm and rhyme, poems that rhyme and have rhythm, that's an important thing. And you need to think about the structure of the poem. Some of that we've already done. I highly recommend, if you haven't looked at the videos in this series, earlier videos, please go and watch them. All right, so we're diving into Manhunt. So Manhunt's a cool poem. We're not going to do context today. I suppose what I would just quickly say is when you're looking at a full poem in all its detail, you want to try and use a grid like this, or you might add the context on the front, like I said, if it's like part of your anthology. But you want, ideally, having read a poem, to have considered the structure, rhythm, rhyme, all that stuff I've already told you. So let's read the poem. Now, before I read any poem, I just realized I haven't full screened it, my bad. I typically look at the structure just a little bit, just to get kind of some first impressions. So what I see in this poem straight away, I see that it's phase and days, trace and face, explore and jaw. But then I see it goes to hold and bone. So what I see here is that the rhyme of the poem breaks down. So it starts off A, B, B, C, C, rhyming couplets, right? But then it breaks down hold and bone. They are not rhyming. They don't even half rhyme, right? So there's something interesting happening with the rhyme here. Straight away, I noticed that. Structurally, I see that the poem is clearly written in couplets. So I'm just going to make a quick note of that. Couplets throughout. Now, I'm not sure why that is just yet. Well, I mean, I do know why, but assuming it's an unseen poem, we don't know why just yet. The line lengths, what you want to do is you want to just quickly look at whether you can create a line of best fit that most of the lines match to. So I'll just draw one here. As you can see, the lines are all over the place, right? So there is no line of best fit here. You can't make this work out the way that you would like. So there's a real zigzagging across the lines. Again, assuming I'd never seen this poem before, I wouldn't know why the lines were erratic, but I can see that they are erratic. So I'm just going to write that down as well. Just adding another comment, erratic line lengths. Now, the reason that I do that before I read the poem is because I want you to try to always integrate a little bit of structure, a little bit of rhythm rhyme into any language you talk about, into when you're talking about themes and motifs, which is, as I said, what we're going to mostly talk about today. I want you to get in that mindset that the first thing you look for is structure. Why? Because whether we're talking poetry anthology or unseen poetry, one of the things every year that year 11s are not doing enough of is talking about the structure in their poems. You want a level 9? Talk a bit more about structure. You want a level 9? Integrate structure or rhythm rhyme into things that you're already talking about when you think about language. All right, so let's read the poem together. And the other thing I'll just quickly say, just to help you a little bit with this poem, it's called Manhunt, kind of intense name, right? But there's a second name to it, which I should have included. It's also called Laura's poem. So this is all written from the perspective of the wife, but you'll know that as soon as we read it. It's clearly from the perspective of someone looking at someone else. After the first phase, after passionate nights and intimate days, only then would he let me trace the frozen river which ran through his face. Only then would he let me explore the blown hinge of his lower jaw, and handle and hold the damaged porcelain collarbone, and mind and attend the fractured rudder of shoulder blade, and finger and thumb the parachute silk of his punctured lung. Only then could I bind the struts and climb the rungs of his broken ribs, and feel the hurt of his grazed heart. Skirting along, only then could I picture the scan, the fetus of metal beneath his chest where the bullet had come to rest. Then I widened the search, traced the scarring back to its source, to a sweating, unexploded mine buried deep in his mind, around which every nerve in his body had tightened and closed. Then, and only then, did I come close. Okay, great poem. Simon Armitage is our current poet laureate as well. That's a good thing to know if you end up writing about a Armitage poem, either in the Unseen or the Poetry Anthology. He is Poet Laureate. I always struggle to spell that, Poet Laureate. And that basically means he's the national/royal poet. So he's literally commissioned to write poetry for any big events that happen, any national events that happen. The previous Poet Laureate, we haven't actually done anything on in this series, but her name was Carol Ann Duffy. She's, I think, in both the Power and Conflicts and the Love and Relationships. I think she's got a poem in each of those. Anyway, so what themes and motifs do we see in here? What ideas are repeated? Well, the poem is talking about a soldier returning from war, right? So we get that pretty much straight away after the first phase, after passionate nights and intimate days. So we've got this idea of time that is established through nights and days. So that's one of the repeated ideas. Time is established as an idea, a repeated idea. And we know that this is probably a couple, and it's a married couple. The soldier, the man, has just come back from war. And I suppose something that would be useful, you wouldn't have this in an unseen poetry thing, I admit that, but just to help you with this a little bit more, you've got the 5 stages of grief. So let's see if I can find a good picture of this quickly. Would help if I was looking on images, wouldn't it? Yeah, it's also known as the Kubler-Ross model. We don't necessarily need to worry too much about that, but if we just make a smaller version of this, there we go. So, so at the beginning of any deep trauma, quite often you're in denial. I have a sad story to add to this, like personal story. So last week, one of my dogs back in England died. He had been battling cancer for about 6 months, and unfortunately it took him. This very morning, one of my cats died. He was 19, he'd lived a very full life, but we had to put him down because he had just, his body had failed. His body was failing. Right now, there's a good chance I'm in denial a little bit. I haven't fully grieved yet the fact that I've lost two of my loved animals. And my mum and dad, who they live back with my mum and dad in England, they definitely are in denial at the moment. They haven't fully got to the stage of understanding the gravity of the trauma, right? And so this couple, the fact that he comes home and they have passionate nights and intimate days, they're kissing, cuddling, whatever married couples do, right? When the guy gets back from war. This is denial at the moment, yeah? So at this early stage in time, which is the repeated idea, there's this denial of the trauma. And that's the reason I bring this all up is that's the reason why time is in the poem. As we go through it, you'll see that more. So something else that is repeated over and over again is what's called temporal shift. So there are shifts of focus, right? Focal shifts, where you shift your focus from one character to another character, or from one setting to another setting, from one topic to another topic, or whatever, right? But a type of focal shift can be called a temporal shift. And that's specifically if you're shifting in time. So only then, obviously, is a shift in time, because you go from this time to only then this next time, and then only then. So it keeps shifting time. So we see that time is a very important theme and idea in the poem. Now, why might that be? Why might a poem about a soldier returning from war have this whole thing about time? Well, the main reason is because of the fact that trauma takes time. They say like time heals all things, right? So at the beginning of this poem, the soldier and the wife are both in denial. And they're still in denial here. She's tracing the frozen river in his face. So this is obviously a metaphor, the fact that his emotions are like frozen, right? Then she's exploring the blown hinge of his jaw. So maybe his jaw has been injured in battle, yeah? But this is then a setup of another theme. So we've got the theme of time, and then we've also got the theme of the body, right? So we've got his face, then we've got his jaw, then we've got his collarbone, then we've got his shoulder blade. It's like an anatomy test. I'm just touching different bits of body. So shoulder blade, then his punctured lung, then his broken ribs, then his grazed heart. Yeah. And what you notice, so this is clearly a theme. It's a repeated idea of the body, the face, the jaw, the collarbone, and so on, right? Now, what you also notice if you dive a bit deeper is that her exploration gets deeper and deeper, right? So at first, you can see the face, right? You don't, someone could be all the way in the corner of the room and they'd be able to see my face. It's not that intimidating. Like if you look someone in the face, like it's just what we do. Likewise, the jaw, you can see the jaw, it's superficial, it's right there on the surface, yeah? But then we go to the collarbone and notice that when the poem's rhyme breaks down, this is also when the collarbone is mentioned. So she sees the face, she sees the jaw, but then to see the collarbone, you can't see the collarbone without investigating, right? You have to sort of pull clothing potentially down. It's a slightly more intimate part of the body. So when she explores deeper into his body to try and work out the trauma he's gone through, because as a wife, she's trying to understand what's happened to her husband in war to help him, right? And to heal him, help him heal. But as she dives deeper into the body, that's when the rhyme breaks down. Now that we see that, we can see that you've got the theme of time, you've got the theme of the body, and then that kind of maybe explains the couplets a bit more and the rhythm rhyme, or particularly the rhyme a bit more, right? So at the beginning, it's all clicking along, phase, days, trace face, explore jaw, it's all smooth, it has this flow to it. But then she explores a little bit deeper. She goes to the collarbone, broke down, yeah? Breaks the flow. suggests conflict, suggests there's a problem. Yeah. And then that continues to be an issue. Broken rhyme, there's no rhyme here. Half rhyme here. This is maybe a slightly better day, but they're still not really connected. And as we see that rhyme, and we see that through the body and the exploration, that connection is kind of wavering, we get an idea of why it's written in couplets as well. So the couplets, it's kind of cheesy, but it links to the couple, right? So there's him and her, couple, yeah? So when it rhymes, the couple's just getting along great. When it doesn't rhyme, the couple isn't getting along great. And that's where, if we think about this grief cycle, we're going through. So imagine this bit here. He's okay with her looking at his face, looking at his jaw, like just from a slight distance, like giving him his space, right? But when she tries to examine deeper into his body, his collarbone, his shoulder blade, his lungs, his ribs, this is all stuff that is covered up. That's where maybe we get to anger. Yeah. Get away from me. Like, I'm not, I've already gone through enough in war. So it links to that second stage of the grief cycle. And that makes sense because of the theme of time. Time is moving along. And so the grief cycle is moving along. Then we get to potentially bargaining later on. And notice again, the time keeps on going along. Only then, and, only then, and. Skirting along, only then, again, yeah? And we get to bargaining when we get this more disturbing image. This is no longer of the body, but something in the body. A fetus of metal beneath the chest, where the bullet had finally come to rest. So now we're even extending that theme out more. So it's still the theme of the body, but now we've got a fetus of metal. This is a very strange image, right? A fetus is a baby. A fetus of metal is it's a very strange, complex image. And the fact that it's then we find out a bullet. So the reason he's all messed up is because there's still a bullet in him from war, right? So that's extending that theme out of the body more. And we get to bargaining at this end point. His body has tightened and closed around this bullet, around this pain. The bullet is symbolizing his pain, right? And then we get the bargaining. Then and only then did I come close. And it's an unexploded mine in his mind. So she starts to understand that she can't push him too far, too fast. She has to love him from a slight distance and try and understand that he's hurt and he's wounded. But we get this bargaining, this idea that at the end of the poem, she's starting to work out how to be around him again. And we have this hope from that theme of the body because of the grazed heart. So a graze is not a permanent thing, right? Like, he's been messed up in war. His heart, his emotions, everything is sore and raw. And, a graze looks really horrible. But in the end, it's going to be okay. So those are a few themes in there. We've got the theme of time. We've got the theme of the body. What I want to do now with you is try to write a little bit of a paragraph to help you out with how you then write about themes. So let's imagine that the question you get given here is, how does the poem explore a broken relationship? Yeah, how does the poem explore a broken relationship? Now, that's the sort of question that would probably come up in more of the love and relationships poetry. But let's have a think about that. So you're going to want to write 3 or 4 paragraphs if this is the poetry anthology answer. If it's the unseen poetry, you're probably going to want to write about 3 anyway. So let's treat this as an unseen poetry paragraph looking at a broken relationship. One of the ways that the poem explores broken relationships. And remember, we could talk about structure, we could talk about language, we could talk about anything. But since this lesson is more about themes and motifs, I want to focus much more on themes and motifs for you. So one of the ways that the poem explores broken relationships is through the theme of the body, which is constantly referred to in Manhunt. You see that there is a progression from his face which is something easy to look at and assess even from afar, into the porcelain collarbone and beyond. As Laura explores the body of her husband, they become more and more broken. Their relationship becomes more and more broken. This is also reflected in the rhyme scheme, which goes from rhyming couplets into broken rhyme at the point that Laura goes deeper into her exploration of the husband. The face and jaw are superficial, but the collarbone onwards is not. The body is also used to represent how the husband has been physically damaged by war. I'll actually put this on the next page just so you can read it a bit more easily. Damaged by war, since porcelain is a fragile material. And let's do one other one. The parachute silk of the lung also refers his body back to war. His body was an instrument of war till he returned home. And so this further explains why the relationship is broken. Now, I could stop there. That's probably a pretty good paragraph looking at just like the theme of the body, but I'm going to show off and go a bit deeper because why not? However, there is hope for the broken relationship introduced through the theme of time. Repeatedly, we see that the stanzas contain the words "only then," and this temporal shift shows how crucial time is to the healing of this relationship. We are left at the end with the notion that Laura can come close to her husband again. Okay. So I'll probably leave it there for this model paragraph. That's pretty long for an unseen paragraph. I would say if you wrote a paragraph of that length for unseen, you're probably looking at doing 2 paragraphs of that length, just because of the time constraints. If you're doing this for the poetry anthology, you would add context at the end. And so, you know, I'm not going to add context today because that's not the point of why we're here, but contextually, you know, pretty easy. You could talk about the effect of war, World War II, PTSD, all that good stuff. So that's a paragraph for you. That's how to write an unseen. You could build off this to make it into a poetry anthology paragraph. Of course, in the poetry anthology, you're likely going to have to compare it with one other poem as well. So just bear that in mind. So I think that's everything for today. I hope that was helpful. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please do comment down below. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks very much.